The morning light caught on the glass facade like judgment itself, sharp, unblinking, absolute. Inside one conversation too casual, one assumption too confident, and the cost would echo through every floor by nightfall. The kind of downfall you can't undo had already begun. For stories where truth quietly turns power inside out, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. What's your first guess about the twist waiting behind that calm? Langley First Bank towered over downtown like a marble monument to exclusion, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun and a silent hierarchy of privilege. Every polished tile whispered wealth, every chandelier seemed to hang not for light, but for judgment. And that morning judgment arrived in the form of a black man named Malachi Rivers. His stride was steady, respectful, deliberate, the gait of a man who had fought for dignity long before this building existed. He wasn't dressed in opulence. His charcoal gray jacket showed years of careful wear, his shoes carried more miles than shine, and his briefcase bore creases like wrinkles of experience. Yet there was precision in him, a quiet power wrapped in restraint. The moment he crossed the threshold, conversation softened. A receptionist's laughter clipped mid-note. A pen paused over a checkbook. In the temple of money, silence was the first act of exclusion. Royce, the security guard posted near the revolving door, straightened his uniform. Broad-shouldered and underpaid, he wore authority-like armor. His eyes scanned Malachi up and down, deciding the verdict before any crime existed. "Morning," Royce said, though it wasn't greeting, it was inspection. "You lost, sir, the outreach center's across the street." His voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of a man who'd said those words before. Malachi offered no correction, no visible anger. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his ID, extending it with calm precision. Royce stared at it longer than necessary, hunting for something to doubt. "Malachi Rivers," he repeated slowly, the name rolling off his tongue like a challenge. "And you have business here?" "I have an appointment," Malachi replied evenly. 9 o'clock. Financial Director, Suite 4B. Royce nodded but didn't hand back the ID. His eyes flicked to the gold-lettered signs ahead, Private Clients Executive Services General Line. The words gleamed like unspoken barriers. "You'll want the general side," Royce said at last, chin angling toward the rope divider, where the less privileged queued. The other side of that velvet rope gleamed with espresso machines' tailored suits, and smiles meant only for those who met the dress code of worthiness. Malachi took back his ID, nodded once, and walked where he was told. The marble beneath his feet was cold enough to bite. As he joined the line, heads turned slightly half curious, half dismissive. The woman in pearls in front of him tucked her purse closer. A man in a navy blazer checked his phone, then glanced at Malachi's shoes, the kind of look that measured another man's story by the polish of his leather. The bank's hush returned heavy and orchestrated. He'd felt that hush before, in boardrooms where his ideas were praised, but his presence questioned in restaurants where politeness masked distance. Today he didn't flinch, he observed. His eyes scanned the room's architecture, the chandelier like frozen rain, the gold plaque engraved with the bank's founding date, the proud slogan above the entrance. "Integrity is our currency." He almost smiled. The irony could have paid interest. Behind the counter, a young teller whispered something to a colleague. They both glanced at him, then laughed softly, their smiles slipping behind professionalism when he looked up. He wasn't new to humiliation disguised as policy. His patience was discipline, not passivity. He reached into his briefcase, not to prove anything to them, but to check the documents that defined why he was really here. Inside were contracts embossed with legal seals, partnership drafts, and a letter of authorization bearing his signature only under a name that wasn't meant to be recognized: M.L. Redding, founder of Brixton Financial. It was an alias used only in high-level negotiations, the kind that built or broke corporations. He closed the case gently. They didn't deserve to see its contents yet. At the front desk, Brienne, the receptionist, lifted her eyes at last. Next, she called, skipping over Malachi to wave forward a woman in a silk blouse. "Sorry for the wait, Miss Harlow," she said brightly, stepping around Malachi as if he were invisible. Miss Harlow smiled, her perfume trailing luxury. Malachi waited silently, watching professionalism turn selective. The seconds stretched. When Miss Harlow was escorted to a private glass suite, Malachi finally approached the counter. "Good morning," he began, voice calm. "I have a scheduled appointment with Mr. Donnelly Suite 4B. Brienne's fingers hovered over her keyboard, then froze. "Do you have an appointment confirmation?" "Yes," he said, holding up his phone with the email displayed. She squinted at the screen but didn't read it. That system's been acting strange today," she murmured. Her tone was sugar-coated dismissal. "You can wait over there by the ATM lobby." She pointed without looking at him. "Someone will check on that soon." The words "someone" and "soon" floated between them like hollow currency. Malachi stepped aside, his patience intact, but thinning. Behind him, laughter sparked again, brief, brittle, cruel. Royce leaned against a column, arms crossed, smirking. Every second in that room felt measured, weighed, and priced. Yet through the layers of humiliation, there was still clarity in Malachi's eyes. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are, even when the world pretends it doesn't. Ahead of him stretched two lines divided by a velvet rope. One side was labeled General Services, the other Private Clients. The difference wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, almost ceremonial. On the private side, the carpet was thicker, the lighting softer, and the smiles warmer. Malachi was told to stand on the general side. The message was simple: you can be inside, but not among. The woman in front of him, a middle-aged client wrapped in luxury, turned slightly to glance at him, her pearl earrings catching the light. She gave him the same look one gives an unfamiliar shadow in a bright room. She said nothing, but her expression said everything. On the other side of the rope, a banker laughed softly with a client as an espresso machine hissed in agreement. Malachi inhaled deeply, letting the aroma of wealth and indifference mix in his lungs. He'd been in worse rooms than this one's, where rejection came with signatures instead of stares. This was merely performance, a play of superiority acted daily, but the irony was exquisite. Langley First Bank was still using facial recognition software, licensed by a division once owned by Brixton Financial, his firm. That very system, while intended to streamline client verification, had just scanned him and flagged him as a priority account. Yet the alert never reached the floor staff. The feature had been disabled by the floor manager, Cheston Hale, a man who prided himself on reading people better than machines. His arrogance would soon cost more than he could imagine. Cheston stood by the service kiosk, tall pressed suit hair, cut to the corporate standard, and a smirk shaped by years of unchecked authority. He whispered something to his assistant, a young woman with anxious eyes and a name tag that read, Leah. "Screen better next time," he murmured, nodding in Malachi's direction. "He doesn't fit." Leah's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. She was new earnest and frightened of making mistakes. Out of curiosity, she toggled an internal view on her monitor, a list of scheduled high-priority clients tagged under encrypted initials. Near the top, one name caught her eye. M. Rivers, meeting, 9:00 a.m., Suite 4B. Her stomach dropped. She glanced at the man waiting quietly near the ATM lobby, the same man everyone was pretending not to see. She turned toward Cheston, voice trembling. "Sir," I think he cut her off with a smile that wasn't friendly. "Let the adults handle this," he said, patting her shoulder before she could finish. His tone was soft, but patronizing, the way men in power dismiss both truth and conscience. Malachi's gaze caught hers for a fleeting second. He saw her hesitation, the small war behind her eyes. She looked away, cheeks flushing with guilt. He didn't blame her. He had seen this scene play out too many times, good intentions suffocated by hierarchy. Behind the counter, Brienne pretended to type, but was really watching Malachi through the reflection on her monitor. The way he stood calm, composed, dignified, unsettled her. He wasn't defensive like she expected. He wasn't impatient. He was still, and that stillness made everyone else fidget. To them, he was out of place. To him, they were predictable. Cheston crossed the lobby toward him, tablet tucked under one arm. "Sir, can I help you?" he asked, the words coated in politeness but sharp beneath. Malachi turned slowly. "I believe I'm already being helped," he said, gesturing slightly toward the desk. Cheston smiled thinly. "We just want to make sure you're in the right line. This one's for verified clients." The irony was almost poetic. "I have an appointment," Malachi replied. "Confirmed." "I'm sure you believe that," Cheston said, chuckling lightly. "But sometimes systems glitch." He tilted his head, a practiced gesture of superiority. "We'll sort it out. Please wait near the exit until we can verify." The surrounding clients pretended not to listen, but they were listening. They always were. Malachi didn't argue. He simply nodded once and stepped aside, positioning himself where the sunlight hit the polished wall, painting half his face in brightness and half in shadow. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. A man split between perception and reality. A guard glanced toward Cheston for approval before repositioning near the door. The choreography was complete. Everyone in that room had silently agreed on his lesser worth. The irony, of course, was that Langley's internal system, still quietly humming behind the glass, was trying to correct them. Every 30 seconds it pinged a soft alert on the regional server priority client M. Rivers awaiting assistance. The message repeated, then timed out, then repeated again, bouncing through ignored channels like a heartbeat in a machine that no longer listened. Leah saw it. She froze, staring at the pulsing red dot on her monitor. When she tried to click into the record, the screen locked. Unauthorized access. It read. Somewhere deep inside the network, an automatic audit log began recording every staff interaction in the lobby that morning. Malachi didn't know it yet, but the system he had built to track accountability was doing exactly what it was meant to do, silently collecting truth. The minutes crawled. Royce the guard drifted closer, his presence deliberate. "Still waiting, huh?" he muttered. "Sometimes it takes a while for these appointments to disappear from the system." He grinned at his own joke, but Malachi didn't bite. He adjusted his cufflinks and checked his watch. 9:06 a.m. The appointment was technically late, but that didn't matter. He had no need to rush. Time was about to rearrange itself around him. Brienne finally called out again, her voice too bright, too false. "Mr. I'm sorry." "What was your name again, Rivers?" he said simply. She typed, paused, frowned. Doesn't seem to be showing. Maybe you should contact customer service from home." The marble floor gleamed so bright, it might have been ice, and in that shine he saw the symmetry of a system built to mirror only itself. The laughter that had once been hushed now grew comfortable again, drifting across the lobby in faint ripples. He could hear the distinct cadence of entitlement, the sound of people who had never been told no. A banker in a fitted navy suit, Reagan Lyles, noticed Malachi still waiting and decided boredom was invitation enough to be cruel. "Hey, buddy," he called from behind his counter voice, casual, almost friendly. "You need directions to the public assistance office. It's just around the corner." The comment slipped out with practiced ease, landing soft enough to be denied later, but loud enough for the people nearby to hear. A few customers smirked behind polite hands. Malachi didn't respond. He just adjusted the strap of his briefcase and waited. His stillness infuriated Reagan, who wanted a reaction. "You know," he continued, lowering his voice to feigned concern, "if you're here to make change for bus fare, I can handle that without an appointment." Another small wave of laughter rolled through the lobby. Malachi looked up slowly, eyes calm and unreadable, his tone level when he spoke. "I'm here for a meeting. That will do for now." His words were simple, yet the evenness in them carried weight, a kind of quiet dignity that silenced the laughter for a heartbeat. But only for a heartbeat. Nearby, a man in his 60s wearing a gray business coat turned at the sound of Malachi's voice. Recognition flickered across his features. His name was Harold Dempsey, CEO of a mid-size logistics firm that Brixton Financial had saved from collapse 3 years earlier. He knew that voice. He'd heard it in conference calls advising steady decisive. His lips parted in disbelief. He could have spoken then, could have walked across the marble floor and shattered the illusion of hierarchy. But fear held him like a hand to the throat. His company still depended on Langley First's credit line. He lowered his eyes and pretended not to see. That was the first betrayal of the day, the quiet kind that stains worse than the loud. Across the counter, Reagan leaned forward, his grin tightening. "You folks are patient, I'll give you that," he said loud enough for the words to bounce against the vaulted ceiling. The receptionist Brienne didn't intervene. She had heard worse, said worse even, but it was easier to let the cruelty run its course. The security guard Royce lingered near the entrance again, arms crossed, watching for an excuse. Every pair of eyes in that room served as part of the machinery of humiliation. Malachi could feel their attention pressing against his back like weight. He didn't move. He had learned the discipline of stillness a long time ago in boardrooms and battlefields of business, where power was currency and silence was armor. But he also knew that injustice, when ignored, had a rhythm. It grew bolder with every unchecked whisper. Sir Brienne called from the desk, finally, tone dripping false sweetness. "If you don't have an active appointment in the system, we'll have to ask you to come back another day." Malachi opened his phone, scrolling to the email confirmation. "I do," he said. 9 o'clock with Mr. Donnelly. Confirmed through your office." He turned the screen toward her, but she didn't lean forward to look. Instead, she pressed a button beneath her counter to summon internal assistance, pretending it was routine. At that same moment, the Wi-Fi in the building flickered. His phone screen flashed red network access denied unverified device. The connection cut off entirely. He stared at the blank screen, realizing the system had isolated his device. They had erased him digitally now, too. "Seems like your phone's not cooperating," Reagan said with mock pity. "Maybe you typed the wrong bank." The laughter returned sharper this time. A woman nearby whispered something about these types and laughed into her coffee cup. The sound sliced deep, not because it was loud, but because it was lazy cruelty without effort. Malachi pocketed his phone. His pulse was steady. He reminded himself that control was the currency of every storm. "I'll wait," he said quietly. "That won't be necessary," Reagan replied. "You've already been waiting long enough." He turned away, dismissing him, as though erasing a name from a ledger. The security guard approached again, hands clasped behind his back, posture deliberate. "Everything all right here?" he asked Reagan, pretending concern. "Just fine," Reagan said. "We're making sure our guest finds the right exit." The guard chuckled. It wasn't even hidden anymore. The older man in the gray coat shifted his weight, the guilt almost visible on his face. He reached for his briefcase, glanced once more at Malachi, then walked toward the door. As he passed, Malachi gave a faint nod, one human acknowledgement to another, but Harold couldn't hold his gaze. He left quickly, eyes on the floor. Malachi watched him go, thinking not of anger, but of sorrow, the quiet kind that comes when you realize good men will sell their integrity cheaper than they sell their stocks. Behind the counter, Brienne received a message through her earpiece. "No appointment found," a voice said flatly from upstairs. "Escort if necessary." She looked at Malachi, then at Royce, who nodded once as if given permission to act. "Sir," she said, her voice tightening, "please take a seat near the exit while we verify further." It wasn't a request. It was a ritual. The other clients pretended to focus on their transactions, but the collective hum of judgment filled the air like static. Malachi turned toward the seating area, slow and measured. Every step he took echoed against the marble, a sound that seemed to grow heavier with meaning. When he sat down, he rested the briefcase beside his leg and folded his hands in his lap. Malachi's shoes clicked in counterpoint, each step unhurried. He carried his briefcase like a weight and a weapon all at once. The sign on the door they stopped before read "staff only," but the letters had faded with time, leaving only the word "only," which felt more appropriate. Royce opened it and gestured inside with the authority of habit. Malachi entered without hesitation. The door shut behind him with a sound like a lock, clicking though no key turned. The room was small fluorescent light buzzing overhead, its walls painted the color of old dust. A metal desk stood at the center, flanked by 2 chairs, one loose one bolted down. Malachi took the loose one. The silence hummed with artificial energy. as though the air itself waited for someone to speak first. 5 minutes passed before the first man entered, white shirt-striped tie clipboard clutched like a shield. He didn't introduce himself. He simply asked name. Malachi's response was smooth. Malachi Rivers. The man wrote it down as if transcribing fiction. Purpose of visit appointment, Malachi said, with the financial director. The man's eyes flicked up briefly, registering no belief. And who scheduled this appointment? Mr. Donnelly's office, Malachi said. Confirmed last week. The man nodded slowly, as if humoring a child. We'll verify that, he said, turning toward the single outdated desktop computer on the counter behind him. He typed with 2 fingers, his brow furrowing. The cursor blinked on the screen for a long time, then he shrugged. Nothing's showing under that name, he said flatly. You sure it's this branch positive? Interesting, the man replied, and jotted something down. The door opened again. Another employee stepped in carrying a thin folder. She wore a navy blouse and an expression that was meant to look professional, but only managed to seem defensive. We've got a flagged entry here, she said to the first man, cross-referenced under a different category. She handed over the folder. He flipped through the pages and frowned. Looks like system noise, he muttered. Probably test data from the pilot program. Has a Tier 0 clearance tag, though. That's impossible, she said. No one outside executive operations has that. Malachi watched them quietly. He could see the seal on the corner of the page, his seal embossed from the very foundation his firm had built for financial data integrity. That isn't test data, he said gently. The man looked up, lips tight. Sir, please refrain from interrupting. Malachi's gaze held steady, then read the authorization code in the footer. The woman flipped to the bottom, reading aloud. Her voice faltered halfway through. It matched the encryption key of Brixton Financial. She closed the folder quickly and said, It's irrelevant. System errors happen. I'm sure they do, Malachi replied. His tone wasn't sarcastic. It was worse, it was sincere. The man placed the folder down, forcing a laugh. We'll figure it out. While we do, I'm going to need you to confirm a few details. He began listing them: address, date of birth, identification number. Malachi answered without hesitation. Each answer matched perfectly, but the man's pen hesitated anyway, his disbelief unshaken. And who exactly are you representing today, Mr. Rivers? He asked finally. Myself, Malachi said, and perhaps something larger than that. The woman exchanged a glance with her colleague, the kind people share when faced with something they can't explain and would rather dismiss than understand. All right, she said briskly, just a few more routine questions. Her tablet screen glowed faintly as she scrolled. How long have you been banking with Langley First? Long enough to know what it used to stand for? Malachi said. She paused, but didn't ask him to clarify. Do you manage your accounts independently? I manage my life independently, he said softly. The man behind the desk sighed, tapping his pen. Look, Mr. Rivers, let's not make this complicated. We're simply trying to verify your status. Sometimes clients misunderstand account tiers or think an email means authorization. Happens all the time. Malachi leaned back slightly. And sometimes systems misunderstand the people who built them. The man blinked, confused. Excuse me. You're running a compliance interface designed by Brixton Financial, Malachi said. The encryption pattern in your system audit logs, it's mine. The woman frowned. That's proprietary information? I know, Malachi said, because I wrote the clause that makes it so. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The man's pen froze mid-tap. The air changed temperature. Who sent you? The woman asked. Finally, her voice low. Malachi looked at her expression unreadable and said one word: faith. It landed softly, but the room absorbed it like thunder. The two employees exchanged glances, unsettled, not by the answer's content, but by the calm it carried. The man cleared his throat. You'll have to wait here while we sort this out. Take your time, Malachi said. You've already taken enough of mine. They left the room, and for a few minutes he was alone. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed louder now. He set the briefcase on the desk, resting his hand atop it. His fingers traced the brass latch, not in nervousness, but in memory. He remembered the countless meetings where this case had rested between him and people who thought they owned the world. They reached the edge of the main corridor again, where the scent of coffee and cologne bled into the stale chill of the back offices. The contrast was deliberate, front of house for privilege, back for containment. Waiting there, framed in the golden light from the lobby, stood Cordell Briggs, branch director, dressed in the kind of precision-cut suit that looked more like a weapon than clothing. His watch gleamed under the overhead light as he turned toward them, expression carved from disdain. "Is this the gentleman causing our little verification delay?" he asked, his voice calm, but heavy with authority. Royce nodded. "He claims he has an appointment with Donnelly." Cordell's lips twitched into something close to amusement. "Of course he does." He stepped forward, his cologne sharp, his movements predatory, the kind of presence that fed on hierarchy. "Mr. Rivers, was it? Do you know how many people walk into my bank every week claiming they have appointments? It's astounding how imagination thrives when money doesn't." Malachi didn't respond. His eyes stayed on the floor, not in submission, but in focus, calculating distance and tone. "Let's make this simple," Cordell continued. "Why don't you show me what you've brought with you?" Royce shifted, slightly aware of the delicate balance between authority and spectacle. Malachi set his briefcase on a nearby counter and opened it carefully. Inside were neatly stacked documents contracts in thick cream envelopes and a few embossed folders marked with discreet security seals. Cordell reached forward without asking and yanked the case toward himself, the papers spilling out in a slow-motion cascade of order turned chaos. The soundpaper brushing marble echoed through the lobby like accusation. Gasps followed. A few nearby employees paused, unsure whether to intervene or watch. Most chose the latter. Malachi remained perfectly still. The first sheet to hit the floor slid under a desk, stopping at the foot of Leah, the young intern who had noticed his name earlier. She bent instinctively to pick it up. Her eyes froze when she saw the gold seal, embossed at the top, Strategic Partner Access Tier 0 authorization. She recognized it instantly. She'd seen it once before in a compliance training video reserved for senior executives. It was the highest form of institutional partnership, a status that allowed override access across all financial divisions. Her mouth went dry. She opened her lips to speak, but heard Cheston's voice over her shoulder. "Don't touch that," he hissed, grabbing the page from her hand. "You didn't see anything." His tone was sharp enough to draw blood. Leah lowered her gaze, her conscience burning behind silence. Cordell crouched slightly, scooping up a few pages from the floor, skimming the dense text without reading comprehension. "What's this?" he asked mockingly. "State documentation, these look like intake forms." He laughed under his breath, waving a page like a flag of victory. "What did you do, print these at home?" The surrounding staff chuckled, not because they believed him, but because hierarchy demanded loyalty to ridicule. Malachi slowly knelt, gathering the remaining papers one by one, his movements deliberate, reverent even. Each fold, each stack was an act of reclamation. He didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. To defend would mean he sought validation from them. He didn't. He knew what truth would do when left to its own devices. It would surface, and it would suffocate the lies standing above it. Cordell tossed one sheet onto the counter. "You know what's funny," he said. "You people always think confidence substitutes for credibility." Malachi stood calm. "And you always mistake arrogance for authority." For the first time that morning, Cordell's composure wavered. Royce cleared his throat, uneasy with the shift in tone, but Cordell recovered quickly, smirking. "That's clever," he said, pretending amusement. "Unfortunately, clever doesn't get you past security protocols." He snapped his fingers toward Royce. "Escort him to the side exit. I'll note it in the system as non-client interference." Royce hesitated. "You want me to file the report, too? I'll handle it," Cordell said, pulling his tablet from his jacket pocket. He opened the internal compliance form, selecting the appropriate incident code, unverified individual, escorted without incident. His fingers moved fast, confident. He entered the time, signed his initials, and pressed Submit. The screen blinked once, then displayed Upload Complete. Cordell didn't notice that the data had just synced directly with the Brixton Financial Integrity Network, an automatic backup Malachi's system had quietly preserved within Langley's infrastructure since their partnership years earlier. The log now contained Cordell's name, his signature, his timestamp, and a full video feed of every action taken in violation of corporate ethics policy. Cordell looked up satisfied, unaware he'd just signed his own confession. Malachi closed his briefcase, the lock clicking softly. "I assume my appointment is canceled," he asked. "Let's call it redirected," Cordell replied with mock politeness. "We prefer to manage expectations early." He waved a dismissive hand toward Royce. "Show him out." Royce gestured, but Malachi didn't move immediately. He let the silence breathe for a moment longer, his gaze sweeping across the faces of those who had watched. Leah stood frozen behind her desk, her expression torn between duty and shame. Their eyes met briefly. He didn't need words to say what she already knew, that this moment would follow her for the rest of her life. Then he turned, walking toward the exit without resistance. His shoes tapped against marble, a slow, echoing metronome of dignity. As he reached the glass door, he paused and glanced back once, not at Cordell, not at the staff, but at the towering emblem engraved into the marble wall. "Langley First Integrity is our currency." The words meant to project virtue now read like an indictment. Outside, the sunlight was blinding, the kind of bright that exposes every flaw. Royce stopped just inside the doorway, watching as Malachi stepped onto the concrete steps. His posture straight, his presence undiminished. Every pane of glass caught fragments of his reflection, fractured pieces of dignity distorted by wealth. Inside, Cordell returned to his office, oblivious to the silent tremors already spreading beneath him. He poured himself a glass of water and checked his reflection in the window, admiring what he thought was control. From where he stood, he could still see the steps below the place where Royce had escorted the unverified man from his domain. The irony was exquisite. The building's AI surveillance system, programmed to flag irregular incidents, had already tagged Malachi's image under executive profile. It wasn't malfunction. It was truth breaking through disguise. The system, linked through a still-active Brixton integration node, had recognized his biometric ID, an access imprint left from his partnership years ago. But Cordell didn't notice the quiet alert in the corner of his terminal Tier 0 entity unscheduled visit. Incident audit initiated. He believed himself untouchable, like every man who had built his authority on paper rules and unexamined cruelty. Downstairs, the lobby returned to its false normalcy. Brienne resumed her smile. Reagan fetched another espresso, laughing nervously to prove to himself that everything was fine. Cheston pretended to review spreadsheets, but his pulse quickened every time the internal comm light blinked. And Leah, the intern, sat frozen at her desk, her mind replaying the sight of that gold seal. She wanted to speak, but the culture of silence at Langley was thicker than its glass walls. The janitor, a quiet man named Amos, began sweeping near the western exit. He was invisible to most, though he had been there longer than half the staff. When he bent down to sweep under the door, he found a single sheet of paper caught in the draft. It bore the embossed crest of Brixton Financial and the heading Legacy Fund Strategic Beneficiaries. His eyes skimmed the first line, Langley First Bank, listed as primary beneficiary. He frowned, folded the paper, and slipped it gently into his pocket. He didn't know its worth yet, only that something about it didn't belong in the trash. Upstairs, Cordell adjusted his tie and sat behind his desk. Royce entered, standing at attention. "Handled," Royce said curtly. Cordell nodded, uninterested. Any disruption, none. The guy didn't even argue. "Good," Cordell said. "That's the problem with these people, they still think quiet means grace." He leaned back, savoring his own words. "But it just means they've accepted their place." Royce hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Do you want me to finalize the incident log?" "I already did," Cordell said. "Systems updated, we're covered." He turned to his monitor, tapping open the compliance dashboard. On screen, the report appeared under a neat header, "Unverified individual escorted without incident." The line glowed briefly, then flickered as a hidden subroutine activated. The Brixton-linked archive began syncing the footage from multiple security cameras, Royce's initial confrontation, Cheston's mocking gestures, Reagan's insults, Cordell's authorization code. Each pixel, each sound wave, each sneer preserved. Cordell's terminal froze for half a second. He frowned, then dismissed it as a glitch. "Replace the marble tiles near the entrance," he said, gesturing toward Royce. "They're scuffed." Royce nodded, though the idea of repolishing marble after such a scene felt absurd. "You got it?" He turned to leave. And Royce Cordell added, "Yes, sir. Next time, escort them through the side hall, not the lobby. I don't need this kind of optics." Royce smirked. Understood. The door shut softly behind him, and Cordell reclined in his chair, spinning his pen between his fingers. He didn't realize the optics he feared were already being transmitted to a remote audit center in real time. In the basement, the bank's data integrity system, a Brixton-designed network once considered over-engineered, had initiated its self-preservation sequence. Every 30 seconds, it duplicated files flagged under executive oversight. Cordell's own signature now sat on 3 separate servers cross-referenced with his live incident record. The institution he believed he controlled was quietly building a case against him. Outside, Malachi paused at the curb, watching the reflection of Langley's towers ripple across passing cars. He saw the distortion of glass and the arrogance of height. He thought of his mother's voice again. "One day you'll find the highest walls are the ones people build around their own fear." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. He knew this wasn't the end. It was the echo before the break. Back inside, Reagan strutted past the teller desks, sharing the story of the incident, like gossip dressed as professionalism. Guy walked in like he owned the place, he said. Didn't even have the right clothes. Thought confidence was a credit score. The others laughed, nervous, unsure whether to admire or condemn. Cheston joined in, eager to regain control of the narrative. "Some people confuse access with belonging," he said smugly. His assistant forced a laugh. Leah didn't. Her stomach turned as she glanced toward the corner of the lobby, where Malachi had stood in empty space now, but still waited like air that refused to reset. The silence beneath the noise was what haunted her most. Upstairs, Cordell received a call. "Operations." He answered smoothly. The voice on the other end was clipped professional. "Mr. Briggs, this is Compliance Division. We received an automatic escalation from your branch's surveillance node. Is everything stable?" Stable, Cordell repeated, annoyed. "Yes, everything's fine. Must be a false flag," perhaps the voice said. "Still, protocol requires confirmation. We'll review the audit manually." Cordell forced a chuckle. "Knock yourself out." "We will," the voice replied, and hung up. The line clicked dead. Cordell sat still for a moment, irritation crawling across his face. He hated oversight almost as much as humility. But he shrugged it off. Men like him didn't believe in consequences, only delays. Down in the lobby, Amos finished his sweeping pocket, still holding the folded page. He walked toward the exit, his steps echoing the same rhythm Malachi's had minutes earlier. He glanced once at the emblem etched in the marble wall. "Integrity is our currency." The words no longer sounded like pride, they sounded like prophecy. Later that night, as the bank's automatic system ran its end-of-day cycles, the audit program triggered again, sending duplicate reports to every regional compliance branch. The footage of Malachi's removal played silently across screens built to hide scandal. But data doesn't lie. It only waits to be read. And somewhere in the heart of the system, the name M. Rivers pulsed faintly in red, awaiting recognition. Everything was not. Deep within the bank's server infrastructure, a hidden protocol had already begun unraveling the financial architecture of Langley First. It wasn't sabotage, it was consequence written long before arrogance met accountability. The system audit initiated by Brixton Financial had identified Cordell's false report, matched it to the timestamp of the video feed, and confirmed the violation of executive access rights. The system cross-referenced the entity tagged M. Rivers against Brixton's partner database. A silent verification confirmed Malachi's identity as founder and principal director. At 9:02 a.m., the exact minute he had exited Langley First's front doors, The audit node triggered a cascading action titled Partnership Clause Ethical Breach Section 9B. The result? An automatic recall of $3.2 billion in interlinked assets held under Langley's management. By the time Cordell finished his drink, the Empire had already begun to bleed. The first sign appeared as a flicker on his computer screen, a notification from Treasury Control. Balance discrepancy. Detected. Priority tier. He frowned, clicked, and waited for the numbers to stabilize. They didn't. The digits dropped line by line like falling dominoes, account 1, 2, 3, all showing red. He rubbed his eyes, convinced it was a display glitch. Then the phone rang. "Langley Midtown, this is Briggs," he said impatiently. The voice on the other end was sharp and clipped. "This is Brixton Financial's audit liaison. We're calling to confirm execution of our transfer order. The full withdrawal of $3.2 billion should reflect in your ledgers as of 9:03 Eastern." Cordell froze. His mouth went dry. "I'm sorry, what order?" "The divestment order issued under Brixton's contractual clause effective this morning," the voice replied calmly. "Your executive office received notice at 8:46. The system logged receipt and confirmation." He stared at his monitor. The red lines kept multiplying balances, vanishing in real time. His voice faltered. "That can't be correct. I haven't approved anything." "It doesn't require your approval," the liaison said. "It requires integrity, and by our system's records, yours failed verification." The call ended before he could respond. The dial tone felt colder than silence. Cordell leaned back in his chair, heart pounding, the sound of his pulse louder than the city outside. He reopened the compliance dashboard, but every link was grayed out. Access denied. He clicked again, harder. Still nothing. Then a new message appeared in the corner of his screen. Authorization revoked. Client ID M. Rivers. Termination under Clause 12B. The air in his office thickened. He whispered the words aloud as though they were foreign. M. Rivers. His fingers trembled on the keyboard as he typed the name into the corporate directory. The result hit like a physical blow. Malachi Rivers, founder, Brixton Financial Tier 0 partner. The photo beside the name was unmistakable. The same man he had laughed about, humiliated, escorted out like a trespasser. His vision blurred. The irony was cruel enough to taste. Downstairs, the lobby carried on with artificial calm. The espresso machine hissed. Phones rang. No one yet knew the floor beneath them was collapsing in slow motion. Brienne received a notification on her terminal, a small pop-up she almost ignored. Corporate portfolio freeze Brixton accounts. She blinked, confused, clicked it open, and gasped. The number made her heart stop. Every account labeled Brixton Financial Vanguard Strategic Holdings and Rivers Trust had vanished. The totals displayed zeros. She turned to Reagan, her voice trembling. "Do you see this?" Reagan leaned over her screen, frowning. Must be a system error. But even as he spoke, his own monitor blinked with the same warning: hold initiated. External audit in progress. The color drained from his face. What the hell is happening? Across the lobby. Cheston's tablet buzzed. He swiped, expecting a meeting reminder, and instead found an emergency broadcast from the compliance division: stop all internal communication referencing client ID M. Rivers. CEO review pending. He read it twice, then 3 times. His throat tightened. Leah saw his expression and whispered, "Sir, what's going on?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Upstairs, Cordell's office door burst open. Royce entered, face pale. "Sir, Treasury's on the line again. They're saying the regional accounts are locking up." Cordell turned, his voice strained. "That's impossible. Get it to stop the transfer. We tried. They said it's not our system, it's Brixton's." Cordell grabbed the phone, punching the line. "This is Briggs. Halt that transaction right now." The operator's voice came through calm and detached. "I'm sorry, Mr. Briggs, but the order has already cleared federal authentication. The transfer completed 38 minutes ago." The room spun. He dropped the receiver. Outside the office, the building's energy shifted. Phones rang. Staff whispered, the illusion of control dissolving into panic. Leah looked up from her desk as the main display board above reception flickered. The usual scrolling messages about client satisfaction were replaced by a single line of text: account restricted. Please contact executive relations. the words repeated across every screen. The lobby fell silent. Even the air felt heavier. Brienne whispered, "This can't be real." Reagan backed away, eyes wide. "He did this," he muttered. "That man, he did this." Cheston swallowed hard, looking toward the exit where sunlight still filtered through the glass. "He waited," he said quietly. "He let us write our own execution." Cordell staggered toward the window, gripping the sill with white knuckles. The phone on his desk rang again, but he didn't answer. He already knew who it would be, corporate compliance legal, or maybe the regional CEO demanding answers he didn't have. He could hear the buzz of frantic voices echoing down the hallway outside his office. Royce barked orders to security staff who no longer believed him, while Cheston paced in circles near reception, muttering numbers and excuses. The building trembled under its own noise. On every screen across every floor, the same message looped, "Account restricted, please contact executive relations." Employees stared in disbelief. Some whispered, others grabbed their phones and began texting friends at other branches, desperate for reassurance that this wasn't real. It was. In less than 40 minutes, Langley First had become the face of modern humiliation, broadcast not through headlines yet, but through panic whispers and disbelief that sounded like thunder in corporate hallways. Cordell grabbed his tablet, opening the branch's internal security dashboard. The feed displayed the lobby, the reception desk, and most painfully the footage of Malachi Rivers being escorted out by Royce. He tried to delete it, but the remove button was grayed out. The Brixton system had already flagged it as evidence under audit. "No," he muttered, pressing harder as if force could undo it. Instead, the feed glitched, and suddenly his face appeared full screen across all internal monitors. His voice echoed through the bank's loudspeakers, captured from the same recording. "You people always think confidence substitutes for credibility," his own voice sneered, "and you always mistake arrogance for authority." The irony was unbearable. The clip cut, replayed, and looped across every department display, an unintentional confession broadcast to hundreds of employees. Brienne covered her mouth in horror. Reagan turned pale, his laughter from earlier still fresh in his mind. The janitor Amos stood frozen, with his broom mid-air, watching the man who had treated others like dirt, now exposed to everyone above and below him. Leah felt her stomach twist, vindication and shame intertwining until she could hardly breathe. Upstairs, Cordell slammed the tablet shut and hurled it against the glass wall. It shattered. "Shut it off." He roared into the hallway. "Kill the feed." But no one moved. No one dared enter his office. In another part of the city, inside the glass tower of Brixton Financial, a pre-scheduled alert reached its final timestamp. The Ethics Clause activation protocol that Malachi had signed months earlier had a built-in communication feature. Once a verified breach was logged and executed, a press summary would be released automatically to ensure public transparency. At 11:04 a.m., major financial networks received an identical encrypted email titled, "Brixton. Financial announces withdrawal from Langley First over ethics concerns." Within minutes, Bloomberg broke the headline. Langley First Bank loses $3.20 billion partnership amid racial discrimination allegations. CNBC followed, then Reuters. The story spread like a wildfire fed by irony. Screens across the nation lit up with Cordell's photo pulled from the company website, his title displayed beneath Branch Director Langley First Midtown. The article quoted sources from inside Brixton, confirming that the decision had been initiated directly by CEO Malachi Rivers, following an incident of severe misconduct and client mistreatment. By noon, the news was everywhere. Outside the bank, reporters had already begun to gather. Cameras pointed toward the mirrored entrance, where only hours ago Malachi had walked out alone. Inside, the staff read the news on their phones, their faces reflecting realization in real time. Cheston dropped his tablet. Brienne burst into tears. Reagan cursed under his breath, pacing back and forth like a man whose reflection had just turned on him. He was the CEO, Reagan whispered. He was the damn CEO. Amos leaned against his broom, shaking his head slowly. No, he murmured, he was the lesson. Cordell's intercom buzzed again, compliance insistent now. He pressed the button, his voice hollow. "What, Mr. Briggs? This is Compliance Director Laura Nance. You're being relieved of operational authority, effective immediately. Please stay in your office until security arrives." "You can't." He started, but the line went dead. The lock on his office door clicked automatically. His ID badge deactivated. He tried the handle, it didn't move. He was trapped inside the glass office he once ruled like a throne room. He turned back toward his desk, staring at the blinking cursor on his monitor. It pulsed over a single line of text that had appeared during the system sync, "Justice without vengeance." It was the motto of Brixton Financial's community fund, and it had been written by Malachi himself. The irony burned hotter than shame. Downstairs, HR arrived with security escorts. Each staff member involved in the incident was summoned one by one. Reagan, Brienne, Cheston. Leah watched as they were led away, their faces pale, their steps uneven. She wanted to feel relief, but all she felt was hollow. Guilt had weight, and it clung to her like humidity. A corporate email landed in every inbox simultaneously, Langley First to undergo immediate national audit. All staff are required to submit full statements. The subject line below it read, "Press inquiry protocol, do not engage." But it was too late for silence. Clients were already withdrawing funds. Investors were selling stock. The market had smelled blood, and it was moving fast. The Langley First stock ticker, once a steady pulse of prosperity, now blinked red on every trading floor in New York. By 1:00 p.m., its value had dropped 20%. By 2:00:30, Cordell watched helplessly as years of polished illusion dissolved in real time. Every arrogant smirk, every whispered insult, every policy of exclusion, all of it now worth less than the paper his false reports were printed on. At 3:15, his monitor went black. The branch system shut down completely, forcing all operations to a halt. The building lights dimmed to emergency levels. Royce returned to the lobby, muttering about power issues, but no one listened. People were packing their desks, grabbing belongings, trying to escape the ruin before it reached them. Outside, the news vans multiplied. The once bustling lobby now echoed with footsteps that didn't belong to clients, but to federal auditors and ethics investigators carrying tablets, scanning systems, and opening sealed envelopes with latex-gloved precision. The marble floors that had reflected arrogance now bore scuff marks from the boots of accountability. Every display screen in the building had been disconnected from the main server. Every door required manual access. The emblem on the wall still read, "Integrity is our currency," but someone had taped a notice below it, "Branch closed, federal investigation in progress." Upstairs, Cordell sat in a glass-walled conference room, stripped of title, stripped of composure. His suit was wrinkled, his hair out of place, his watch resting on the table like a useless relic of a man who thought time obeyed him. Two investigators from the Office of Financial Oversight sat across from him, their calm professionalism sharper than any courtroom tone. "Mr. Briggs, the senior auditor, began. Your compliance report from yesterday morning was automatically transmitted to our archive at 9:17 a.m. under Clause 8C of Federal Partnership Monitoring. Do you confirm this submission?" Cordell's throat tightened. He hadn't known the system sent anything beyond internal logs. I don't recall authorizing transmission," he stammered. The younger auditor flipped a tablet around, displaying his digital signature. "This is your approval stamp, correct?" Cordell stared at it, the same initials he'd scribbled 100 times without thought. "Yes," he said faintly. "That report included a statement that you escorted an unverified visitor without incident." The senior auditor's tone remained measured. The attached footage, however, contradicts that statement. It documents verbal harassment, procedural misconduct, and unlawful detainment. It also shows your signature being entered at the exact timestamp of the incident. The system auto-flagged it as conflict of interest. Cordell leaned forward, desperate. That was an internal misunderstanding. "The man, Mr. Malachi Rivers," the auditor interrupted, voice flat. "Founder and CEO of Brixton Financial, your institution's largest strategic partner." The words cut through the room like surgical steel. Cordell closed his eyes, pressing his palms together. "I didn't know," he whispered. "No, the auditor said you didn't care to know." Silence followed heavier than accusation. Outside the conference room, other interviews unfolded in small, echoing offices. Reagan sat slumped in a metal chair, his arrogance gone, his voice hoarse from repeating the same failed excuse. It was just a joke, he kept saying. "I didn't mean it." The HR investigator, unimpressed, simply replied, "Intent doesn't erase impact." Brienne sat in another room, fingers trembling as she recounted her inaction the way she'd chosen the comfort of silence over the risk of decency. Cheston tried to argue policy, insisting the procedures were followed. The auditors listened, took notes, and reminded him that no policy could justify humiliation. Royce refused to speak at all, staring blankly at the table, jaw tight, the realization of his role in dragging an innocent man echoing too loud in his own head. Downstairs, Leia sat across from a different kind of silence. She had been called in not as a suspect, but as a witness. Her hands shook as she unfolded a letter the investigators had handed her, found in the overnight mailbag, addressed to her in clean, deliberate handwriting. The envelope bore no return address, only the initials MR. Inside, a single sheet of thick ivory paper read, "You saw what others refused to see. That is the beginning of change. Thank you for standing even when standing still felt safer." She folded it carefully, eyes wet, heart pounding. "He remembered me," she whispered. The investigator across from her said nothing, but his expression softened. "Sometimes the world remembers the quiet ones first," he said. In a nearby room, one of the federal tech analysts discovered something extraordinary. "Sir," he called to the lead auditor, "you'll want to see this." On his monitor was the digital log of Cordell's compliance submission. Embedded within it was a hidden line of code, Brixton Compliance Mirror, active sync enabled. It meant every report Cordell had filed in the past 2 years had also been mirrored to Brixton's off-site data archive. Every misrepresentation, every falsified entry, every abuse of policy preserved, time-stamped, authenticated, and now legally admissible. The auditor leaned closer, astonished. "He built the very machine that would indict them," he murmured. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in that room. Outside, the morning traffic hummed past, indifferent to the storm inside. Reporters stood behind yellow caution tape cameras, ready narrating the story of a corporation's downfall in calm, rehearsed tones. Words like discrimination, audit, and malfeasance drifted through the air, carried by the same wind that rustled the flags hanging limply above the bank's entrance. Inside, Cordell was asked to sign one final document acknowledgement of termination and cooperation with federal inquiry. His pen hovered above the paper for a long time before it touched down. The once smooth handwriting now trembled, uneven and human. He looked up, eyes hollow. "Where is he now?" he asked quietly. "Mr. Rivers." The auditor exchanged a glance with his colleague. "He declined to comment," she said. "He issued no statement to the press, no lawsuit, no public condemnation, just silence." Cordell nodded slowly. The truth hurt more than exposure. The man he had humiliated didn't need vengeance. He had already transcended it. By afternoon, the federal team began cataloging the physical evidence, shredded documents retrieved from bins, hard drives, copied encrypted drives, sealed. The janitor Amos stepped forward and handed over the paper he'd found wedged under the door the day before. The collapse of Langley First became the story of a generation not because of the money lost, but because of the lesson it forced into the bloodstream of every institution that believed wealth excused cruelty. By the end of that week, the bank's nameplate had been removed from every branch, its logo stripped from office walls, its executives replaced by temporary auditors. The once revered titan of finance was now a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and taught in ethics seminars under the heading The Brixton Clause Incident. News anchors spoke in tones of awe and shame. How one journalist asked on national television, "Does a man lose billions and still emerge richer?" The answer wasn't in the balance sheets. It was in the silence of the man who never demanded an apology. Malachi Rivers never appeared before cameras, never stood on podiums, never issued public condemnation. He simply redirected the entire $3, $2 billion withdrawn from Langley into a fund that no one saw coming, the Rivers Initiative for Financial Integrity. It offered grants to small banks in underserved communities, training for young auditors, and scholarships for students from neighborhoods where opportunity used to be a rumor. The press learned of it weeks later when the first public statement appeared on Brixton's homepage, 12 words that carried more weight than any press release. "We don't rebuild walls. We build doors for those kept outside." No signature, no flourish, just truth. Across the city, life moved on, but not unchanged. Leah, the intern who had once been too afraid to speak, accepted a full scholarship from the initiative's mentorship program. On her first day at the new office, she found another envelope waiting on her desk. Inside was a note in the same steady handwriting as before. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stays silent until the world is ready to listen. She placed it beside her keyboard and began her new role reviewing community lending policies for bias. In her drawer, she kept the letter folded neatly, like a compass pointing towards decency. Amos the janitor retired 2 months later. At his farewell gathering, someone handed him a framed quote printed in gold letters. It read, "Guess the real wealth ain't in marble." He chuckled softly. "Wasn't mine first," he said, "but I'll take the credit." The laughter that followed wasn't mockery. It was relief, the kind that comes when people finally understand they had been part of something larger than a story of collapse. Cordell Briggs disappeared from headlines after the investigation ended. He was disbarred from the financial sector, stripped of bonuses, barred from serving on any board for the rest of his life. Yet years later, a small radio station in North Carolina aired a quiet interview with a man named Briggs, who had opened a counseling practice for corporate ethics violators. His voice trembled when he spoke. "I thought power meant leading," he said, "but it meant listening. I failed to understand that success without conscience is just polished decay." The host asked if he ever heard from Malachi Rivers. Cordell paused. "He sent me a book," once he said softly. "A collection of essays on humility. No note inside. Just one line underlined in ink. You can't repent for arrogance until you learn to see people as equals." The interview ended with silence, but the kind that feels like understanding. Reagan Lyles, once known for his arrogance, joined a mentorship program at one of the youth centers funded by the Rivers Initiative. His first week, he was assigned to teach financial literacy to teenagers from the same neighborhoods he once ignored. He struggled at first, fumbling through his words, unsure how to explain trust after having destroyed it. But one afternoon, a boy named Jonah asked, "Why do rich people never say sorry?" Reagan didn't have an answer, so he told the truth. Because most of us didn't know how until someone forced us to see what we looked like from the outside. The boy nodded slowly, and for the first time, Reagan felt the weight in his chest begin to lift. Cheston Wade disappeared from corporate banking altogether. He became an anonymous columnist, writing under a pseudonym for a blog that published stories of workers who had been humiliated or silenced by prejudice. His writing was raw, unfiltered, and full of regret. One of his essays went viral, titled "The Day Marble Learned to Listen." At its end, he wrote, "He didn't shout, he didn't fight. He just stood long enough for the mirror to crack." Readers shared it thousands of times, unaware that the author once mocked that same man. In the following year, the Federal Ethics Office published its closing report on the Brixton Clause case. The summary was simple. No charges filed by the aggrieved party, corrective measures implemented voluntarily, outcome systemic improvement. The report closed with a statement from an anonymous Brixton representative: "Justice doesn't require revenge. It requires reflection." It was assumed to be written by Malachi himself. Meanwhile, Brixton Financial soared in public trust. For every dollar withdrawn from Langley, 2 were reinvested in community resilience. Schools received funding for financial literacy. Retired veterans were trained as mentors. Elderly clients received protection against predatory banking practices. The world saw not vengeance, but transformation. And that was the final lesson Langley never learned: that integrity is not what survives power, but what defines it. Malachi never revisited the site of his humiliation, but sometimes he passed near the block on his way to new meetings. The old building had been converted into a public business center under new management. Where the marble emblem once stood now hung a bronze plaque, engraved with quiet dignity, in memory of those who were told they didn't belong. This place belongs to you. He paused there once, Scout his aging Labrador at his side, the briefcase still the same, but lighter now. The wind off the city carried faint echoes of traffic and laughter. A woman passed by and recognized him from a photo she'd seen in an article. "Mr. Rivers," she said softly. "I read about what you did. You changed everything." Malachi smiled politely, the kind of smile that hides pain behind peace. "I didn't change anything," he said. "I just stopped pretending I couldn't." He adjusted his coat and walked on the sun rising behind the glass towers that once judged him. Somewhere behind him, light hit the plaque, just right, illuminating the words, "Belong to you." The reflection spilled across the sidewalk, catching in the puddles left from the morning rain, breaking the light into a spectrum of quiet colors. Proof that even broken glass could reflect something beautiful. The end. If this sort of story moved, you hit like and subscribe. It helps these true-to-life stories reach more hearts. I'd love to know what you think about Malachi's journey. Was the ending what you expected? Tell me where you're watching from, and share your thoughts about the plot in the comments below.